first things first, I have to address the elephant in the room. I have been procrastinating making this video for probably 2 months now. It's been in the pipeline since I shot Canadian Nationals. Shooting action sports in low light can be super difficult, regardless of what action sport you're shooting, whether it's climbing or something else. So in this video, I'm going to go over a few tips on how I was able to make it work and how you can too. First things first, since we have to get it out of the way, we're going to talk about gear. So when it comes to gear, you're looking for a few things. You're looking for a good full frame camera, something with a decently large sensor size so you can let in a good amount of light. And it also reduces the necessity of having a faster lens, which was the next thing I'm going to talk about. So when it comes to lenses in low light, the most important thing is your aperture. Now obviously if you want to shoot things like group photos where you need more things in focus, or things where you might not need that depth of field, you might have to switch up what kind of apertures you're using. But it is important to have a lens like a prime or anything that is able to go down to 1.8 or faster, honestly, because that can make a huge difference when you have really limited light available. So during Canadian Nationals, I definitely pulled out my 20mm prime. It's a 1.8 aperture and it was incredible because I was able to get super close to the athletes and be able to see the entire crowd behind them if I picked my angles correctly. I also had my 85mm prime, which is also a 1.8 aperture. It was really nice for getting these silhouette portraits of people as they walked in front of the one spotlight that was pointed at them. Definitely would recommend getting yourself a cheap prime that can go down to 1.8 for these types of situations. Super helpful. At Canadian Nationals, we made sure that no one was using external flashes. We didn't want to distract any of the athletes. Also, it completely changes the dynamic of the photography when there's multiple photographers and only one of them is using an external flash. So we opted to just rule them out entirely, and that's often how it goes at a lot of these competitions for the sake of the athletes. So keep that in mind and bring your external flash for the sake of having that option, but be aware that whatever the event coordinator says goes. Next up, let's talk camera settings. So when it comes to camera settings, there's a few things I want to mention, but most importantly, I want to emphasize, do not be afraid of the ISO setting in your camera. There's a moment you truly can't miss and there's somebody standing in a shadow and you want to expose for their face properly. You're not trying to take an artistic photo where only the light is exposed and they're silhouetted. Then you have to crank that ISO setting. And the most important thing always, and let me emphasize this twice, the most important thing always is making sure your photo is exposed properly in the first place. Now the next thing you always have to consider is your shutter speed. Obviously if you're trying to freeze motion, you want to raise your shutter speed to a faster value, but the difficult part about that is you're stopping down the amount of light that you're letting into your camera with each image. And so if you're already struggling for light in a dimly lit situation, sometimes using a fast shutter speed value can be really difficult. So you will have to find that nice balance of making sure you eliminate the motion blur in your image, but also keeping your shutter speed as low as you can in order to allow as much light into the camera as possible. So that's something to keep in mind when it comes to your camera settings that you can monitor while you're shooting at one of these events. And the last thing you have to keep an eye on is your aperture. So obviously you want to shoot with a wide open aperture, which is a low f-stop value, and the advantage of that is it opens up your lens as wide as it can go and lets in as much light as possible. Always keep the balance of these three settings in mind while you're shooting and you'll have a perfect exposure triangle and a perfect exposure in your images. Now let's talk about some shooting techniques and positions you can use. Now when it comes to shooting techniques in low light, there's a few different approaches you can take, but it's honestly stylistically dependent and it's really up to you in terms of what you look for and what you shoot based off the deliverables you're trying to get in the end. So for me personally, when I was shooting Canadian Nationals, I had no specific deliverable assignments. They honestly just asked me to shoot some great photos. And because of the creative leeway, I was able to sort of lean into things like white balance and not try and balance them out, and more be really creative with the edit that comes out in the end. So some of the techniques that I ended up putting into play were silhouetting. I used some of the only spotlights, made sure to position them behind the athletes so I'd get this nice silhouette, and then I would expose for the highlights as opposed to the person themselves. So when it comes to shooting techniques in low light, some of the things you want to consider are making sure you're aware of where the better spots are when it comes to the lighting. Lower light situations, oftentimes there will be a spotlight or something pointed at a very specific location. You can wait for the athlete to go through that location and already have the shot framed. That's one way that you can make sure you get these really amazing photos where people are either silhouetted or hit with the perfect lighting because you had already anticipated where they were going to be. Secondly, don't be afraid to shoot a little wider. Oftentimes by shooting wider angle shots, you'll include the light sources in the image. And just by including the light sources in the image, the viewer of the image sort of understands the motivation of the low light. So even if you choose to keep your images a little bit dimmer, a little bit moodier in the edit, people kind of understand what you were going for more when they can see the light in the image and see where the light was coming from. Now let's talk about what you should do in the edit. So I'm certainly not the first person to say it, but I do have to say it. I genuinely think people underestimate the power of a good edit. So the most important thing obviously at these events is capturing the action and capturing the moments. You want to make sure, even if you're not getting the exact image you want, you get the image in the first place, because you can bring a lot of it back in the edit. So what do I mean when I say bringing it back? Well, let's say there's some noise in your image because you accidentally underexposed it, but it's a really great moment and you really wanted to use it. So how can we bring that back? How can we make that image more usable? Lightroom, for example, is my editing software of choice, and it has some incredible tools for denoising, both manually and using artificial intelligence, and I have to say it's super seamless, a very easy process to use in your editing, and it's incredibly powerful. It works super, super well. That being said, editing softwares are for a lot more than just bringing images back. They're for adding a lot of your own creativity and your own style into your final images. Two photographers can get the same image side by side, but when it comes to the edit, they could edit it entirely differently, and they could be used for two completely different platforms and two purposes that are entirely separate. So it is really important to emphasize that the editing is honestly half the battle or more, and it's really important to learn the skills on Lightroom, and hopefully in the future I'll make some kind of editing tutorial and go through my own process to show you guys an inside look on how I edit my photos. So that's it. It was a quick video and I still procrastinated making it. I hope these few tips that I went over really briefly were at least a little bit helpful. I have a few other videos that I've planned to make later this month that'll hopefully come out sometime in late January, early February. So definitely keep your eyes peeled. Make sure to subscribe to this channel so you don't miss it. And like the video if you enjoyed or if you got any value, leave a comment and let me know. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.